Shabbat shalom, everybody. And I'm going to ask you to mute.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. I'm going to ask you to mute yourselves, please, so that we don't have a lot of extraneous noise. And I'm going to share our blessing for studying Torah. Okay, so let's say the blessing for studying Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of all, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to engage with words of Torah. I am going to try to share the... No, I'm going to have to stop sharing for a second. Okay. I'm going to go back to our text and just get it in good shape. So we are now at chapter 11 of Joshua. And before we embark on it, does anybody have any questions, comments? No. Okay, good. So we're going to start. And so we've looked at the fact that Joshua has been able to conquer a good part of the country. And chapter 11 is covering the northern conquest. The chapter before that, he pretty much took over the south. So we're sort of in the middle of the northern conquest. And I believe we stopped at verse 7. But let's just go ahead and read the first few verses again, just to get us back in the right place. Would somebody like to read?
I can read it,
Thank you.
Rabbi. When Yabin, king of Hazor, heard of this, he sent word to Yobab, king of Madon, to the kings of Shimron and Akspah, and to the northern kings who were in the mountains, in the Arabah south of Kinneret, in the western foothills, and in Naphthdor on the west, to the Canaanites in the east and west, to the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Jebusites in the hill country, and to the Hivites below Hermon in the region of Mizpah. They came out with all their troops and a large number of horses and chariots, a huge army, as numerous as the sand on the seashore. All these kings joined forces and made camp together at the waters of Merom to fight against Israel. The Lord said to Joshua, "Don't be afraid of them, because by this time tomorrow I will hand all of them slain over to Israel. You are to hamstring their horses and burn their chariots."
Thank you for Kat has a comment about it.
Yes,
you did a great job pronouncing those really difficult words. So that's as far as we got last time. And so the thing to note, I'm sorry?
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
I thought it was interesting that they said as numerous as the sand on the seashore, because this is always part of the promise that God makes to Abraham, that your people will be as numerous as the sand on the seashore.
Very good.
Very nice. Dust, and, if you can count dust.
Very good.
I just thought that was interesting.
That's a very good thing to notice.
Mm-hmm.
So Hazor was a very important center. Apparently, at the time of Joshua, it was no longer an important center, but I guess it doesn't matter because we're not worried about the time frame as much. The point is, it's an important center, and so it's significant if it gets captured. And of course, Hazor is the ringleader for getting all these different Canaanites to join together against Israel. And as we mentioned last time, the whole business about having chariots and horses makes them superior in terms of their military equipment. And we also talked about the fact that the king of Israel is not supposed to have horses. Remember that? So they're not supposed to take these horses, right? They're going to hamstring them, which is a horrible thing, but nonetheless, it's so that they don't take the horses and end up in a situation where they are more concerned about their own military prowess over what God will offer to them or promise them. Okay, so you want now you're going to see that in addition to the fact that God is, of course, promising victory, it also takes a certain amount of skill on Joshua's part to win this war. So he's going to do a stealth attack. You want to continue, Jane?
Sure. So Joshua and his whole army came against them suddenly at the waters of Merom and attacked them. And the Lord gave them into the hand of Israel. They defeated them and pursued them all the way to Greater Sidon, to Misrepot Maim, and to the valley of Mizpah on the east, until no survivors were left. Joshua did to them as the Lord had directed. He hamstrung their horses and burned their chariots. At that time, Joshua turned back and captured Hazor and put its king to the sword. Hazor had been the head of all these kingdoms. Everyone in it they put to the sword. They totally destroyed them, not sparing anyone that breathed, and he burned Hazor itself. Joshua took all these royal cities and their kings and put them to the sword. He totally destroyed them, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded. Yet Israel did not burn any of the cities built on the mounds, except Hazor, which Joshua burned. The Israelites carried off for themselves the plunder and livestock of these cities, but all the people they put to the sword until they completely destroyed them, not sparing anyone that breathed. As the Lord commanded his servant Moses, so Moses commanded Joshua, and Joshua did it. He left nothing undone of all that the Lord commanded Moses.
So you see, you have God commanding Moses, Moses commanding Joshua. Joshua is obedient, and because he's so obedient and follows God's dictates, he is successful. And the idea of destroying all these people is not to be tempted by their idolatry and other horrible, practices, even though it's pretty horrible to think about them all being destroyed, but that's another matter. Okay, please go on.
So Joshua took this entire land, the hill country, all the Negev, the whole region of Goshen, the western foothills, the Arabah, and the mountains of Israel with their foothills, from Mount Halak, which rises towards Seir, to Baal Gad in the valley of Lebanon below Mount Hermon. He captured all their kings and put them to death. Joshua waged war against all these kings for a long time. Except for the Hivites living in Gibeon, not one city made a treaty of peace with the Israelites, who took them all in battle. For it was the Lord himself who hardened their hearts. Sounds like Pharaoh. For it was the Lord himself who hardened their hearts to wage war against Israel, so that he might destroy them totally, exterminating them without mercy, as the Lord had commanded Moses.
So here's the deal here. Notice that it says not one city made a treaty of peace with the Israelites. You might remember from the war code in Deuteronomy that you're supposed to offer peace first. And then if it's not accepted, then you go ahead and attack. So we did not actually see Joshua offering peace to anybody, but this little line here tells us that apparently there was some sort of offer of peace. One people took it on and they made a treaty with Israel, but the rest of them apparently were not interested. But of course, then we have the problem of the fact that it was God who hardened their hearts, just like, as you said, Jane, in the Exodus story. In the Exodus story, God hardens Pharaoh's heart. And the reason is so that God can show God's power, right? Because each plague gets worse and worse and worse as Pharaoh says no. And here, the purpose of hardening the hearts is so that everybody can be destroyed and exterminated. So this is, again, a very disturbing passage. And as I've said before, we have to, contend with it because it's there. This is our holy scripture. So I'd like to think of it more in terms of how we destroy within ourselves all of these problematic tendencies in idolatry. But right here, it's pretty much a literal destruction.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Well, I'm struck that it's not just one side that had to have hard hearts to do this. I mean, to perform it's not just the ones waging war against the Israelites, it's the Israelites who had to exterminate everybody in every one of these. And I mean, you don't do that without having a consequence later, right?
That's an excellent point.
So what did they have to put themselves through to recover from that kind of destruction? And when once peace existed, they have just been through something that, I mean, it's unimaginable, right? Even if you want to think of it as literal, right? I mean, they destroyed everybody in every one of these tribes except for one, killed everybody.
That's
child,
idealized version.
City to city, killed every animal, killed every person. I mean, I can't imagine that they
Sounds like PTSD,
normal,
big
peaceful
time.
lives.
Yeah.
It sounds like what, Gail?
PTSD big time,
Well, here's the thing, it really makes you think about, what goes on in the world that we live in, right? I mean, how many genocides have we seen?
Yeah.
Hutus and Tutsis, Cambodian killing fields.
I had another question. I thought
Yeah.
Moses was dead by this time.
What's that? Oh yeah, Moses. Yeah, Moses is dead.
He's still getting commands from Moses.
Well, but before he died, he gave Joshua instructions what to do when he entered the land. Yeah.
Okay.
But if you just think about the kind of genocides that we've witnessed in our time, and torture and genocide, right? Not just genocide, but we know about all these rebellions that have occurred in various countries that people get tortured first. How is it that people are capable of doing that to their fellow human beings? In some cases, their neighbors, right? How do you get to that point? You have to be a fanatic on some level, right? And remember Pinchas, our friend Pinchas? Remember he caught some Israelite men having sex with women who were forbidden, and he skewered them. And then he gets, by the way, given the covenant of peace. So, fanaticism is definitely not criticized in this book. What about the fact that Abraham was willing to take his very own son and take him up to the mountain and kill him without hesitation? Without hesitation. God says, take your son, go do it. And he gets up early in the morning, saddles his donkey, goes up there, has the knife up here, and is about to plunge it before he stopped. And he has to get his name called out twice. So it'd be interesting psychologically to understand what allows people to do that. Now, it's interesting. I taught a class on the Holocaust many years ago when I was at HEC. There were two books that were written about the sort of mentality of the Germans. One was called Ordinary Men by Christopher Brown, which posits that we're all capable of this. It just takes the right conditions. There are experiments that have been done. What's the one with Milgram, where it's a very famous experiment where Milgram sets up a situation where people think that there are scientists telling them what to do. And they're telling them, okay, we're going to train this person in this other room to do whatever it is, some kind of test. And if they fail, you give them a little electrical impulse. And it's not a real electrical thing, but it looks like it is, because every time they press the button, the person, kind of jumps. And when this so-called scientist says, give them more electrical charge, they obey. And the person's like, and they keep doing it because they're told that the scientist said it's okay, do it. So that's Christopher Brown's theory. Daniel Goldhagen, who actually was a Harvard professor, wrote a book called Hitler's Willing Executioners, saying that it was something very specific to Germany, which I really don't buy at all. We've seen too many examples of people willing to do, what Hitler asked his people to do. And what does it take to say, I'm not doing this? Now, think about the Exodus story. The midwives were told by Pharaoh to kill all the babies as they're being born, the male babies, and they disobey. Now, we don't know from the Hebrew text whether these are Egyptian midwives or Hebrew midwives. It is unclear. It gets translated one way or the other by somebody who decides. We have to figure out which is which. So what does it take for women, let's say they're Egyptian, what does it take for women who are midwives, and they are Egyptians to boot, to decide to rebel against what they're being told by their government under penalty of death, right? And if they're Hebrew women, it's almost more of a defiance because they're slaves. And then think about Miriam, the sister, who is really the one who saves her brother, because when the princess finds him floating down the Nile, she comes up with a plan to save the baby. Otherwise, the princess might be throwing him back in the water. Or think about the princess defying her own father. Suzanne.
Zimbardo is the one who did the prison experiment, Stanford prison experiment, and he continued to study that. He has a really good book called The Lucifer Effect, which is all about this, where he argues that first point of view. He actually defended Charles Grainer, who was one of the MPs at Abu Ghraib, basically arguing that it's a culture that creates this behavior and that anybody is susceptible to engaging. But then he's developed a project called the Heroic Imagination Project to train kids to resist those pressures.
Yeah, so just to mention what that prison project is, Zimbardo took people, he's at Stanford, and he took people, just ordinary people for an experiment, made sure they were basically sound of mind, and divided them in half. Half were prisoners and half were guards. And people got into their roles so much that they had to stop the experiment. And this is just an experiment. We're not talking about an actual real life situation, right? So, it doesn't really take that much. It takes some figure of authority telling you that this is okay. It takes peer pressure. And, I have to say, I think some of you know that I was in Guatemala about a year ago with the American Jewish World Service. And one of the things we were looking at was the issue of moral courage. These people have been living under dictatorships for, decades now. And the people who are human rights advocates are literally putting their lives on the line to fight against the government. And, we all have to ask ourselves, would we be willing to do the same thing if we were in the same situation? And that's what it takes in all of these cases, is moral courage, to go against the grain, to go against what your authority is telling you, and to go against fear, the fear of being punished or tortured or killed. So it's really a phenomenon that, we continue to live with. And so I think it's important to look at what it is that allows us to do this. Now, I mentioned, I think last time, that the books I'm using as commentary on Joshua, except for one book, are all Christian. And what they say over and over and over again is that it's clear that obeying God, being God's people, is what is allowing Israel to have a special place and to flourish. In other words, this is a good thing. God said to do this and you did it. That's good. So, not everybody looks at this horrified. They look at this and they say, oh, yes, these people were bad. They needed to be killed. They were going to be a terrible influence on the Israelites. So, and God said to kill them. And God would know best, right? Yes, Dan.
Just two comments. Another very good reference on Evil on a Massive Scale and Genocide is Eichmann in Jerusalem by Hannah Arendt. I think a lot of us read that when it first came out, and others have read it since. How somebody can be capable of such horrible deeds, psychological study. The other comment is I really like the escape hatch that you gave us last time of the metaphor of thinking of this as our own battle against our inner idolater and conquering our inner idolater. So that way you don't have to back yourself into a corner where you're theoretically justifying genocide.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. Melissa? You're muted. And I've been muting people just because there's a lot of background noise. So go ahead.
Okay, give me a second. So it's also a matter of degree, because not every act of moral courage requires risking one's life. And the example I like to think of is when we were going through Riverside Leadership, we took a tour of the prison here in downtown Riverside. And and many of us were very appalled at how the guards derived glee from pointing out who the mental health prisoners were, or where they kept drunk people in cells and told stories about these drunk people in cells. And I remember thinking, of course, they're in this environment, so they become more jaded to what's going on. On the other hand, I felt as if they had gotten some negative response from others as to why behavior like that was not appropriate. It would have influenced how they reacted. And I'm also familiar with the Stanford study, but it seems to me that early in life, particularly in our society today, we allow kids to engage in snarky behavior, for want of a better word, instead of rewarding people and making it cool to actually be kind and empathetic. And so, that's just an example of where not everything is Guatemala, and yet probably, and maybe this is like Lashon Hara, but on a daily basis, we probably all contribute in some respect to perpetuating small little acts of that kind of behavior, which cumulatively become much worse over time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And especially with social media, where it's easy to say nasty things to people because you never have to confront them. Absolutely. Yes.
Sometimes I think it's interesting, as you're talking about that, and you're talking about how we look at things also from the different sides, and as we look at the Christian side and the Jewish side, especially from Joshua. When I was early on in social work and social justice work in Chile post-Pinochet, what was so fascinating wasn't the horrific events that had occurred, which were horrid over a very long period of time. But when we would go around Santiago, we go around other places in Chile, and we would talk about what had happened, and they would talk about the police forces. And this was a society that when helicopters would fly over, people would scatter. It was just because they assumed something terrible was going to happen. But other than the highest ranks within the Pinochet regime, everybody else continued working in their positions, meaning the police forces under Pinochet continued once Pinochet was gone in their same police forces. And I would ask, how people felt about that they would know that that the police officers down the street that are now keeping the peace are the same ones who had taken people into soccer stadiums to pick them up and drop them off in the middle of the Andes or out in the ocean. And they said, that was because that was what was needed at the time. And it was fascinating because if you have people over a long period of time, or they're told it's the right thing to do, and I do agree that there's little bits and pieces that every person can wind up contributing, even in the most simple of situations that can lead to this, but also how that changes over short-term memory, let alone long-term memory. When people look back at an incident, when people look back at some of these situations, and I had always thought it was this all or nothing. Everybody who had contributed, like in Germany, had this, there were the trials or all the things afterwards, even though we knew some people had gone on within society and merged within society. But how do you go from extreme evil to this other extreme, not realizing that so much happens smack dab in the middle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that really, when we were reading through this passage, that's what really brought me, was this whole experience in Chile, and with people saying, yeah, that happened. Okay, but that just happened a couple of months ago. How can you already be in a position of saying, now the police are okay?
Right.
Because they weren't okay before, but now they are okay. Yet you're still scattering whenever you see a helicopter. Like, how does that work? I think that our overall ability as people to recognize not just right and wrong and moral versus immoral, but how we also work collectively to recover from these types of events, I think is also part of the narrative.
Hey, we're going through that right now in this country. How do we recover from 4 years of what we just went through?
And that's what I was going to say. That's kind of where we are collectively now. How do we relate to this? How are we functioning with this? So,
exactly. Thank you. So I just wanted to read you a short piece from one of these Christian books. So this, I'm not trying to disparage Christians. I'm just saying this is the take. This is the Word Biblical Commentary. So on chapter 12. Using all the sources available to him, the final editor of Joshua described the total victory of Joshua over the kings of Canaan. The description was not complete. Shechem is not mentioned, and the hills of Ephraim are sparsely represented. So in other words, this is not a complete takeover of the land. There's more to be done. Completeness is not the object. The writer seeks to compile a list that will impress the readers with the greatness of the feat of God in working for Israel, and of the greatness of the leadership of Joshua in following the example of Moses and completing the task first given to Moses. So rather than be horrified by the stories, we're supposed to be impressed. Wow, look at this. Look what God wrought, and look what Joshua allowed to have happen. Yay, great victory. Still, the writer is aware that much remains to be done. Israel is not given an identity of rest and accomplishment. Even as she basks in the glory of victory and obedience, she faces a new task ahead. She has won the territory. Now she must drive out the remaining inhabitants and settle it. I mean, the way this is written, it's like, well, of course you're going to drive out the inhabitants, and of course you're going to kill them off. I just find this astonishing that this is the take, you know, and both of the books I have from a Christian perspective are like this. She has won the territory. Now she must drive out the remaining inhabitants. She has not been called to a life of constant warfare and celebration of victory. She's been called to a life in the land which God has given her, a life to be lived in accordance with a lifestyle prescribed by God. The first step in fulfillment of that calling is the division of the land. That follows immediately. When that is complete, Israel will have her identity set before her, an identity of life in the land obeying Yahweh, the giver of the land and the law. And that's just one of many, many instances of, you know, the way this is understood. And I just find that quite amazing, because our reaction is not that way at all. Our reaction is, whoa, how are we going to deal with this? And yet this is all about, hey, they listen to God and look at what a victorious people they are. So, Melissa, yeah. Oh, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I do. Thanks for not making me find the hand up down at the bottom.
Yeah, you don't need to do that.
Thanks. Like, you know, when I read Tanakh, and you look at all the instances in which God supports the Jewish people, allows the Jewish people to get ahead, and then, frankly, they behave like all other cultures, screw it up, and lose whatever it is that they were able to build because of God's help. And so when I read this, or even the Christian interpretation, it's like, you know, what else is new? People have temporary victories. They're elated for a time period. They take advantage of the circumstances. They don't evolve as people. They don't become more empathetic toward whomever it is that they conquered. And the next thing you know, they lose whatever it is that they were able to acquire. And so I'm always asking myself, have we really evolved much in the last 3,000 or 5,000 years? And have we even evolved much in the last 100 years when we look at recurring bad behavior? You know, namely, we have genocide going around the world today, and yet no one really stops it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So, I mean, to me, it's always been, well, Jews were just as screwed up as everyone else.
Of course.
Just as human.
Absolutely. I'm not saying we're any better. I'm just, listen, I'm sure, actually, to be fair, if we read the rabbis about this, they'd also have a very, I mean, the rabbis of old, they'd also have a very positive take on this. Okay, so it's not just the Christians. It just so happens that I have Christian material because that's the bulk of what's been written about this. But yeah, it's, you know, we're horrified, but those who are very, let's say, faithful, whether Jewish or Christian, are also taking a very different point of view. I just want to read you another little paragraph, and this is based on chapter 12, also from the other book that I have. This one is the New International Commentary on the Old Testament. Okay. So this is the end of chapter 12. This concludes the description of the conquest as described by the author of Joshua. It has been his concern to present some highlights of this conquest, interspersed and concluded with summary statements intended as a condensed version of historical circumstances, leading to the point where Israel is able to enter into its promised inheritance and into the rest, that is the concomitant of the enjoyment of this inheritance. The conquest is to be seen as the result of God's giving of the land to his covenant people. The land and its people will henceforth be the source from which God's plan of salvation will unfold. So it's interesting that there's this plan of salvation that's based on the destruction of a whole people. And again, I'm sure if I went and looked at I have the more traditional commentary here, which is Jewish, I'm sure it says similar things about, you know, this was the land that was promised and look how wonderful, you know, faithful to God that they are. I mean, it's interesting that faith in God is what allows this all to happen. So, you know, that's where the fanaticism comes in, where you know, believe in something so strongly that, you know, I guess whatever your own conscience might tell you is obliterated.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
I'm I'm far from an expert on Revelations, but isn't there a whole set of Christian teachings that basically that the world ends with a massive war of the believers against the non-believers?
Yes.
And that Jesus's army has to win in order to achieve the conclusion of the whole thing. So I kind of wonder if that isn't of a piece where they need, that's the continuity of, you know, your belief needs to, you know, this is what it was at the beginning, and this is where it'll have to be at the end. And maybe there's something to be said for trying to tie those pieces together, that we are in the middle of those two extremes, but you know, it's to encourage that your faith in every generation needs to be as strong as it was in that time and as strong as it needs to be at the end. And maybe they're just trying to sort of keep people seeing that as a continuity of the timeline. I don't know. But if you think about what's going on today in our country, people have very strong beliefs, whether they're based on reality or not, right? And they're willing to take up arms, right? And listen, any war that is waged is based on some deep-seated belief, whether it's in capitalism or in, you know, democracy or whatever, right? And that's, I think, it's a combination of all these things: a belief system, a culture. Having God as the being that's telling you what to do makes it even more clear what you're supposed to do. We certainly have seen many instances of people who believe they have God on their side, and therefore all sorts of things are permitted. It's kind of scary, but you know, it's in our tradition just as much as anybody else's. Okay, any last comments, or should we go on with the next?
I was wondering if it, you know, the basis for all these stories are basically just to say that you better listen to Adonai, or else you're not going to get what you're supposed to do. You're going to be in trouble, big trouble. So be good.
Yeah.
And it's basically a way to scare people later down the line who read these stories into towing the line, basically.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure that's part of it. Absolutely. But wait, so Sandy and then Jenny.
well, you know, this whole thing, we talk about the things that are going on in the world. And I think I often think about that syphilis study in the South.
Yeah.
And how could they do those things? I mean, they had to consider blacks to be inferior, or they couldn't have done it. I don't understand.
Well, listen, if you think about Nazi Germany, right? Okay, Jews were very integrated into that society. It's not like they were living in a ghetto and they could be, you know, othered really simply. They were integrated, they were married to Christians. They had positions in society that were important. So it was very cleverly done, you know, little by little, pulling them out, right? The Nuremberg laws saying that, you know, you couldn't marry a Jew, you couldn't employ a Jew. I mean, little by little, you know, to the point where they're othered, and then they're talked about like vermin. We know that that has been used recently in relation to immigrants. Talk about them like vermin, about them like people who bring in diseases, people who are trying to take over the world, whatever horrible things, and you get
and rapists and bad people.
Yes. And then you start thinking of them as less than human. And so therefore, of course, it's okay to do these things to them. That's part of the whole thing. I mean, you know, you also have the fact that people are feeling very vulnerable. And so it's nice to find a boogeyman, right? We lost the war. We have huge reparations. We're humiliated. These are very similar to what some of the people in this country have been feeling about losing their middle-class jobs and lifestyles. And the fact that we're not going to be a majority anymore very soon. I mean, all these things are very anxiety provoking. And so if you can find a target to project your anxiety onto, and it's been cleverly manipulated by certain people, you've got a formula for this kind of horror. Jenny?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I just had a question regarding sort of taking, I guess, the conquest on a more literal term, and, you know, seeing it, you know, well, God said so, so it must be okay. I know that sort of in liberal Judaism, we have more of, you know, sort of the option to look at this potentially in a non-literal ways. And I don't know enough about how Christians read or interpret the Bible. And are there also sort of similar ways in some of the denominations of Christianity that they don't have to take it literally, or are there fewer options for working with the text? And I don't know that.
I cannot answer that question.
There are.
Dan, you want to tell us?
Yeah, there are some Christians that take it very literally, but they usually would call them mainstream denominations, don't tend to take the text literally.
Yeah.
Thank you. I want to read you a note in the Art Scroll. So this is the Jewish commentary about the conquests. So Malbim, who's one of the commentators, notes that in several cases, Jerusalem among them, the cities mentioned here remained in Canaanite hands, but their kings were killed in battle. I mean, again, when we get to the book of Judges, you're going to see that a lot of these supposedly killed people are still alive, and a lot of these cities are still not, you know, conquered. The 31 kings, mainline, as Suzanne says, mainline denominations. I mean, I do, you know, I know my friend Jane Quant, who's a pastor with the UCC church, you know, I know she doesn't take the Jesus stories literally. So I'm sure she doesn't take this stuff literally, but I'll have to ask her, actually. I will do that after this class. I'm going to email her and ask her, and I will report back. So Kliakar, another commentator, cites and explains the Midrashic explanations on this chapter. Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, was so prestigious that many kings from outside the country owned cities in the Holy Land, which explains why there were so many kings for such a small country. This is complete speculation, right? But Israel was so prestigious that people from the outside owned land inside Israel. It also explains why the ruler of only one town should bear the august title of king. All the kings of Canaan took part in the banquet celebrating Isaac's circumcision, and they joined in mocking Abraham, saying that surely Avimelech was a true father. Remember, Abraham and Sarah, during one of the famines, went down and stayed in an area where the king was Avimelech. And that was one of the instances in which Abraham asked Sarah to say she was his sister. So clearly there's a possibility they might have slept together. So that these kings are saying, ha ha, Avimelech is really the father of Isaac, not Abraham. Saying that surely Avimelech was a true father since Abraham and Sarah had been married for many decades without offspring. God responded that these scoffers would be conquered by the millions of Isaac's offspring who would inherit the land God promised Isaac. So you go ahead and scoff, and guess what's going to happen to you? Okay, and there's still lots of Canaanites to drive out. It's not fully conquered yet,
Rabbi,
but yeah.
I'm sorry, it's just in looking at this from a perspective that the Christian noters talked about the editors and the authors and the editors, right? And they mentioned that in their commentaries, and I'm having trouble remembering, and I'm sure you've explained this, but why it is that after the 5 books, everything else is considered authored by people, and like why they made that division. Because I mean, you open up this text, and like a teeny tiny of it is the 5 books of Moses, right? And then there's all these writings and prophets and all these other pieces that are not considered part of the 5 books. And I'm a little confused about why that dividing line was put that way, and why it was claimed that these books were written by God and these others were written by people. I mean, is that a clear scholarship at this point?
I don't know if I can answer that question. I mean, as I think I mentioned once before, Joshua was originally part of the Torah. It was 6 books. And somehow somebody decided to lop off Joshua. We don't really know why, because they didn't leave us notes. But I think the Torah itself, with or without the book of Joshua, is what was edited in Babylonia and brought back by Ezra, the scribe. And I think that's the oldest layer of the Tanakh. So, but beyond that, I can't explain. I'll see if I can find something. Yeah. So now we're going to go to chapter 13. And this chapter, oh, wait, somebody has something in the chat. Oh, I already read it. Okay, so we're going to go on to chapter 13. So now what's going to happen is the land is going to be divided amongst the different tribes. And the next few chapters are really not thrilling because it's really about land division. So I just want to focus on a few parts of it that I think are significant. Other than that, I think we're going to skip through. So here, first of all, you're going to have a list of supposedly all the kings that have been conquered and the areas that they conquered. And we're not going to read through it because now the one thing to notice here is you may recall that before Moses died, there were 2.5 tribes that ended up getting land on the eastern part of the Jordan. Remember, they didn't want to cross over. So Moses gave the land to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and half the tribe of Manasseh. So they have that land on the other side of the Jordan, although they were required to participate in the conquest. And then we have this list of all of these kings. 31 kings. Okay, that is chapter 13. So we don't need to read through each name. You can do that on your own. But what I do want to say is the division of the land by the conquering hero. The way in which Joshua is going to divide the land is supposed to be an example to future leaders, because when you get to the kings don't necessarily give the land to the people who need it. They take what they want. So for example, we'll eventually read the story of Naboth's vineyard, which was a land that Ahab wanted. And his wife helped him figure out how to do that by killing the guy. So and we know that, King Solomon had lots of horses and lots of wives, and, he wasn't faithful to God. And you were talking about what happens, that it was Melissa, I think, said that the Israelites constantly, screw up. Yes, they do. They screw up, they get punished. The kings screw up too, and they don't do what they're supposed to do. So they get punished. But this is the ideal way of distributing the land. And apparently the land distribution follows the book of Numbers. So in the book of Numbers, there's an explanation of how the land is supposed to be divided. And apparently Joshua divides the land exactly that way. I have not gone and checked it out because I find this to be quite dull, but anyway. And this is a fair way of dividing the land, not a way for kings to either take land that's not theirs or to give the land away as gifts. Verse 22, wait a minute. So let's go ahead and read this. Somebody want to read?
I can read. When Joshua had grown old, the Lord said to him, "You are now very old, and there are still very large areas of land to be taken over. This is the land that remains, all the regions of the Philistines and the Gerashites, from the Shahar River on the east of Egypt, the territory of Ekron on the north, all of it counted as Canaanite, though held by the 5 Philistine rulers in Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gath, and Ekron, the territory of the Abites on the south. All the land of the Canaanites from Era of the Sidonians, as well as Aphek and the border of the Amorites, the area of Byblos and all Lebanon to the east, from Baal-Gad below Mount Hermon to Lebo Hamath. As for all the inhabitants of the mountain regions from Lebanon to Mishpeoth Maim, that is all the Sidonians, I myself will drive them out before the Israelites. Be sure to allocate this land to Israel for an inheritance as I have instructed you, and divide it as an inheritance among the 9 tribes and half of the tribe of Manasseh."
Okay, thank you. So, Joshua's old. He's lived long enough to conquer most of the land, but not all of it. Apparently what we've seen are the highlights of what he's conquered. And so now the land is being divided. Again, we're not going to read all the details of exactly what land is being given, but of course, to the tribe of Levi, he gave no inheritance. Remember, the Levites do not get land. They get fed by the people in the land who bring offerings to the temple. And those offerings either go directly to God or they go to the Levites for food. Then Moses, again, repeating the fact that, there's some tribes that he gave land to on the other side of the Jordan. And then verse 22, that's what I was looking for. Here, look at this. Why is this coming up here? I don't want this. Okay. In addition to those slain in battle, the Israelites had put to the sword Balaam, son of Beor, who practiced divination. Who remembers who Balaam is? Jane, who's Balaam?
Balaam was hired by Balak to curse the Israelites, and he found that he couldn't do it no matter what mountain he climbed, no matter what he intended to say. He absolutely could not do it.
Exactly. So there's that story, which is in the Torah portion called Balak. Later on, actually, he does find a way to screw over the Israelites because he convinces these women, the Midianites and his tribe. I can't remember the other tribe, but anyway, he convinces the women to entice the men to have sex, which they're not supposed to have, which is when Pinchas comes along and skewers them. So not only was he trying to curse the Israelites, he also entraps them in sexual misconduct. So of course, it's important for us to find out that he gets his own in the end. It takes a long time, right? It's been a while since we read about him. It was in the book of Numbers. And finally, good old Balaam is killed. Okay, before we go on, any comments, questions? Okay, we're gonna skip around because, as I said, it's not the most thrilling. So we're talking about Moses giving, the land to these tribes that were on the east side of the Jordan and to half the tribe of Manasseh. And this is the inheritance that Moses had given when he was in the plains of Moab across the Jordan east of Jericho. But to the tribe of Levi, Moses had given no inheritance. The Lord, the God of Israel, is their inheritance as he promised them. Okay, now chapter 14, we're continuing to divide the land. And we're going to skip the first part of this and go to the allotment for Caleb. All right, who remembers who Caleb is? Jane.
Caleb was the only one who came back. Moses sent spies out into the land. And I think that Caleb was the only one that came back with a realistic picture.
Caleb and somebody else.
Joshua.
Joshua, right? Joshua and Caleb were the two guys who came back and said, of course we can conquer the land because God said so. And everybody else said, oh, no, 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 these people are too big for us. We're like grasshoppers in their eyes. And they get punished. They don't get to go into the land except for Caleb and Joshua. So we're going to see what Caleb gets.
Now these are the areas the Israelites received as the inheritance in the land of Canaan, which Eleazar, the priest, Joshua, son of Nun, and the heads of the tribal clans of Israel allotted to them. Their inheritances were assigned by lot to the 9.5 tribes as the Lord had commanded through Moses. Moses had granted the Lord and a half tribes their inheritance east of the Jordan, but not granted the Levites an inheritance among the rest. For Joseph's descendants had become 2 tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim. The Levites received no share of the land, but only towns to live in, with pasture lands for their flocks and herds. So the Israelites divided the land just as the Lord had commanded Moses.
So there's something about these lots, that the lots somehow make it seem like it's, really a fair division, although of course the lots are also connected to what God decided. And remember, there were lots that were chosen in another instance earlier on in the story. Does anybody remember what that was? Early on? I'm not saying I would have remembered this if I didn't have notes on it, but okay, remember that this guy, Achan, committed a sin, right? He kept some stuff that he wasn't supposed to keep. And lots were drawn to determine who was the guilty party, which suggested that everybody might be guilty on some level because it's sort of communal guilt on some level. Now the lots are being used to distribute the land. It's just interesting. And lots were also used to decide later on the first king, Saul. You may remember from reading that. So it's interesting because lots suggest kind of randomness, but it's all based on God's already selected division of land. So there's some kind of combination of randomness, God, collectivity, So I just thought I'd point that out. All right, now we're going to go back to Caleb. Okay, go on, please.
All right, now the people of Judah approached Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, son of Jebunah the Kenizzite, said to him, you know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God at Kadesh Barnea, about you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land. I brought him back a report according to my convictions, but my fellow Israelites who went up with me made the hearts of the people melt in fear. I, however, followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. So on that day, Moses swore to me, the land on which your feet have walked will be your inheritance and that of your children forever, because you have followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly.
Okay, so Caleb, it's speculated that Caleb might be a Kenizzite. In other words, he's not an actual Israelite, but his loyalty to God is such that he is embraced. And Moses swears him an oath, and therefore, he is going to get some land as a result of that. Okay, keep going.
Who is Caleb's mother?
I'm sorry?
Who is Caleb's parents?
I don't know. Why are you asking?
Because it would determine whether or not he was a Jew or not. In other words, an Israelite.
Right,
So,
but so it's just the commentary says that they think he might be Kenizzite. In other words, he's not an actual Israelite. And we know that people who are not necessarily Israelites are part of the community, right? Because a mixed multitude was picked up along the way from Egypt. There are Canaanites who joined in. We have Rahab and her family that are accepted. We have the Gideonites who are accepted as part of the community. So it wouldn't be completely unusual to have somebody who's not an actual Hebrew be part of the community. And that's actually a good thing that, it's not an exclusionary kind of membership. You can become a member if you, are loyal to God, to our God. Okay, well, let's go ahead, please.
I'm at 10, right? There we go.
Yeah.
Now then, just as Lord promised, he has kept me alive for 45 years since the time he said this to Moses while Israel moved about in the wilderness. So here I am today, 85 years old. I'm still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go out to battle now as I was then. Now give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day. You yourself heard then that the Anakites were there, and their cities were large and fortified. But the Lord helping me, I will drive them out, just as he said. Then Joshua blessed Caleb, son of Jephunneh.
There you go. That's his father.
And gave him Hebron. Gave him Hebron as his inheritance. So Hebron has belonged to Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, ever since, because he followed the Lord, the God of Israel, wholeheartedly. Hebron used to be called Kiriath Arba, after Arba, who was the greatest man among the Anakites. Then the land had rest from war.
I don't know why the commentary said that maybe he's a Canaanite, because it's clear from this that he is. But for some reason, the commentary didn't seem to be completely clear on that. Okay. This chapter is really all about the division of the land. Of course, all based on what God said. And there's a repetition, which is interesting. They've repeated several times that the Levites don't get land, that the 2.5 tribes are on the east side of the Jordan. Here again, it's emphasized that Caleb gets Hebron. Then we have a little story in here. Wait, starting at 14, sorry. Okay. Let's start at 14 and read this little story here. Somebody want to read that?
I can do it.
Okay, thank you.
Just
14.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, 14. From Hebron, Caleb drove out the 3 Anakites, Shishai, Ahiman, and Talmai, the sons of Anak. From there, he marched against the people living in Debir, formerly called Kiriath Sephir. And Caleb said, I will give my daughter Aksha in marriage to the man who attacks and captures Kiriath Sephir. Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's brother, took it. So Caleb gave his daughter to him in marriage. So this is a relative.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One day when she came to Othniel and she urged him to ask her father for a field. When she got off her donkey, Caleb asked her, "What can I do for you?" She replied, "Do me a special favor. Since you have given me land in the Negev, give me also springs of water." So Caleb gave her the upper and lower springs. This is the inheritance of the tribe of Judah according to its clans.
Okay, thank you. So you have stuck in the middle of all this woman who clearly is, pretty gutsy. Hey, you gave me this dry land with no water. I need some wells to go with it. And he says, okay, a little bit like the daughters of Zelophehad. Remember them? The daughters of Zelophehad are the ones whose father dies and has no sons, and therefore his land, who's supposed to get the land? And they say to Moses, we should get the land, the 5 daughters. And Moses goes and asks God, and God says, yes, that's true. Let's give land to daughters if there are no sons. Okay, the next part of this chapter is all about the division of the land of Judah for the territory. So this is from the art scroll. So apparently most of these locations that they're talking about are unknown in modern geography. And Judah's territory is the entire southern part of the land, from the Dead Sea to the Mediterranean, and from Jerusalem south to the middle of the Negev desert. They get the largest land, and they're the ones who survive the history, right? And they are the ones who write it. So they get favored in many different ways. According to the Talmud, the first tribes to receive their portions were those that had exemplified repentance and the acknowledgement of sin. Therefore, Reuben was the first to receive a portion east of the Jordan. What did Reuben do that he had to, obviously now it's a tribe of Reuben, but the Reuben, the name of the tribe, is based on this person, Reuben. Who's he? Anybody remember him? Yeah, Teresa.
He was Jacob's son, and he slept with Bilhah.
Very good. Right. He slept with his father's concubine. Very bad. So his tribe has to repent first, and then they get their land. And the first tribe in the west was the tribe of Judah, whose ancestor had admitted his error in the affair of Tamar. So remember, Judah has a daughter-in-law named Tamar.
Mhm.
He marries one of his sons. The guy dies. According to levirate marriage, she then marries the brother. He doesn't want to have a kid that's going to bear the name of his brother, so he,
Spills his seed on the ground.
yes. And therefore he's killed. And then Judah withholds his third son from her, and she ends up having to trick him into basically sleeping with her, pretending she's a prostitute. And Judah has to finally recognize that she's more righteous than he is, because she's trying to preserve the line of her dead husband, and Judah prevented her. And then obviously King David comes from that line. So, but he's got to repent for that, or at least his tribe does. Another reason that Joshua began the division with the lot for Judah's portion is offered by Abarvanel. Since Caleb had requested the area of Hebron, as had been promised to him, Joshua wanted to determine which territory God had assigned to Judah, Caleb's tribe, to see if his portion would be in the province of his tribe. Indeed, divine providence placed Hebron in Judah's province so that he would not be separated from his tribe. If Israel had not sinned and fallen from its pinnacle of spiritual greatness, nearly all the books of the prophets with their stories of sinfulness and prophetic chastisements would have been unnecessary. Scripture would have consisted only of the 5 books of Moses and the book of Joshua. That might be part of your answer, Jason. They sinned, therefore all these other books were necessary to show how sinful they were. These boundaries are needed to avoid territorial disputes and to delineate the borders of the land, since many of the commandments are applicable only in the land of Israel. Oh, okay, here's a note about who Caleb's mother was. Caleb's mother married Kenaz after her first husband died. Othniel was a child of that marriage and thus was Caleb's maternal half-brother. And then, this is interesting. Yes.
Othniel is the first of the judges. He's
Hmm.
going to become the first of the judges.
Cool. Well, he
So-
deserves it because he's related to Caleb.
Yeah, so it's in the altar footnotes.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So it says, this is interesting because it's not in the text, about Achsah. She urged her new husband to ask Caleb for a source of water to assure their livelihood. When he refused, she took the initiative. Reluctant husband. Homiletically, she was not motivated by economic considerations. Knowing Othniel's greatness in Torah, indeed, he was to be Joshua's successor as a national leader, she felt that without a productive, fertile property, he would be prevented from exerting proper spiritual leadership. So in other words, she's only doing it to help her husband be successful. Okay. Okay, there. Oh, sorry about that. There's some notes. There's some things in the chat. Caleb is from the tribe of Judah, Numbers 13. Thank you, Suzanne. Hebron is where Sarah lived apart from Abraham. Well, that's where she was buried, remember?
Mm-hmm.
That's where the cave of
But
Machpelah.
he traveled from Beersheba. He traveled from Beersheba to Hebron, and the implication is that they were living apart by that time.
If, in fact, she was still alive, because according to the Midrash, she died as soon as she found out what happened at the mountain. So we're not sure. It doesn't tell us in the Torah what happens with them. Okay, so we're going to go on to the next. Okay, this is all more just, this is all the division of the land of Judah. So we're not going to read the details. Now we get to the tribe of Joseph. And I don't have a lot to say about this, and neither does the book of Joshua. Just sure. Okay, remember, Joseph is divided into two tribes. Remember? Half of it is on one side of the Jordan and the other half on the other. Okay, 17. This is the tribe of Manasseh. And then verse 3. Does somebody want to read? Okay, it's just one verse. I'm going to read it. Now Zelophehad, son of Hepher, the son of Gilead, the son of Machir, the son of Manasseh, had no sons, but only daughters, whose names were Machlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. This is the third time that their names are mentioned. And you may notice, as you read the Torah, that a lot of times women's names are not even mentioned. Somebody's wife, somebody's mother, somebody's whatever. These ladies who were very gutsy, who demanded territory for themselves, are named several times. The first time is when they go up to Moses and say, hey, our father died and did not have any sons, and so therefore his daughters should inherit. The second time is when the inheritance is limited at the end of the book of Numbers, because what they decide is, well, what if these women all get this land and then marry other tribal people, and then the land's going to be scattered all over the place. So the restriction is that they have to marry within their tribe, but they're named again. And here they are named again. They went to Eleazar the priest, Joshua son of Nun, and the leaders, and said, the Lord commanded Moses to give us an inheritance among our relatives. So Joshua gave them an inheritance along with the brothers of their father, according to the Lord's command. Small note, but enough to emphasize how important they are. And then we're going to look at the Josephites who are going to complain, which is, I think, verse 14. Okay, let's have somebody read the complaints of the Josephites.
I'll do it.
Thank you.
The people of Joseph said to Joshua, why have you given us only one allotment and one portion for an inheritance? We are a numerous people, and the Lord has blessed us abundantly. If you are so numerous, Joshua answered, and if the hill country of Ephraim is too small for you, go up into the forest and clear land for yourselves, there in the land of the Perizzites and Rephaites. The people of Joseph replied, the hill country is not enough for us, and all the Canaanites who live in the plain have chariots fitted with iron, both those in Beth-shan and its settlements and those in the valley of Jezreel. But Joshua said to the tribes of Joseph, to Ephraim and Manasseh, you are numerous and very powerful. You will have not only one allotment, but the forested hill country as well. Clear it, and its farthest limits will be yours. Though the Canaanites have chariots fitted with iron, and though they are strong, you can drive them out.
So what's going on here?
Well, they're not just being given land, they're going to actually have to wrest it from the forest.
Exactly. Right. That God can say, I'm giving you this land, but it doesn't mean we just sit back and wait till it gets handed over to us. Like, we have to be involved in this activity. And in this particular case, the Josephites are saying, hey, this is not enough land for us. And Joshua basically goes, okay, so go conquer some more land. Like, what's your problem? To work. And they're going, but wait a minute, these guys are superior militarily. And it's like, so what? Get on it right now. All right. Let's see. We're going to hopefully finish the book of Joshua by the next time we get together, because, as I said, most of this is just this really, there's some little gems in here, but you have to plow through to find them. Okay. Let's read this chapter for about 10 verses. Doug, you want to read that?
Yes. The whole assembly of the Israelites gathered at Shiloh and set up the tent of meeting there. The country was brought under their control, but there were still 7 Israelite tribes who had not yet received their inheritance. So Joshua said to the Israelites, how long will you wait before you begin to take possession of the land the Lord, the God of your ancestors, has given you? Appoint 3 men from each tribe. I will send them out to make a survey of the land and to write a description of it, according to the inheritance of each. Then they will return to me. You are to divide the land into 7 parts. Judah is to remain in its territory on the south, and the tribes of Joseph in the territory on the north. After you have written descriptions of the 7 parts of the land, bring them here to me, and I will cast lots for you in the presence of the Lord our God. The Levites, however, do not get a portion among you, because the priestly service of the Lord is their inheritance. And Gad, Reuben, and the half-tribe of Manasseh have already received their inheritance on the east side of the Jordan. Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave it to them. As the men started on their way to map out the land, Joshua instructed them, go and make a survey of the land and write a description of it. Then return to me, and I will cast lots for you here at Shiloh in the presence of the Lord. So the men left and went through the land. They wrote its description on a scroll, town by town, in 7 parts, and returned to Joshua in the camp at Shiloh. Joshua then cast lots for them in Shiloh in the presence of the Lord, and there he distributed the land to the Israelites according to their tribal divisions.
Thank you. So, again, Joshua's like annoyed at these people, right? Why are you sitting around? Like, get to work. And then again, the lots are going to be used to divide up the land. And then they're going to describe again for each tribe what they're getting, the boundaries, the cities that are included, etc. This is for the tribe of Benjamin, Simeon, Zebulun, Issachar, Asher, Naphtali, allotment for Dan, allotment for Joshua. He gets the last piece. And then we get the cities of refuge. Jason, you want to read that?
Sure. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Tell the Israelites to designate the cities of refuge as I instructed you through Moses, so that anyone who kills a person accidentally and unintentionally may flee there and find protection from the avenger of blood. When they flee to one of these cities, they are to stand in the entrance of the city gate and state their case before the elders of that city. Then the elders are to admit the fugitive into their city and provide a place to live among them. If the avenger of blood comes in pursuit, the elders must not surrender the fugitive, because the fugitive killed their neighbor unintentionally and without malice aforethought. They are to stay in that city until they have stood trial before the assembly and until the death of the high priest who is serving at that time. Then they may go back to their own home in the town from which they fled." So they set apart Kadesh in Galilee in the hill country of Naphtali, Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim, and Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the hill country of Judah. East of the Jordan, on the other side from Jericho, they designated Bezer in the wilderness on the plateau in the tribe of Reuben, Ramoth in Gilead in the tribe of Gad, and Golan in Bashan in the tribe of Manasseh. Any of the Israelites or any foreigner residing among them who killed someone accidentally could flee to these designated cities and not be killed by the avenger of blood prior to standing trial before the assembly.
So remember that there were these cities of refuge that were set aside for someone who killed unintentionally, right? So if you kill someone intentionally, obviously you're going to be killed yourself. If you kill someone unintentionally, then, rather than have the family of the person killed come and try to kill you, you get to go somewhere and get a kind of a respite. And it's only when the high priest dies that you're released from this place. Somehow the death of the high priest in some way is atoning for your sin, whether it's intentional or not. Any comments, questions about this?
I have a question about the land. It sounds so much like 40 Acres and a Mule and Manifest Destiny in the United States.
Oh, yeah.
And I suspect that our ancestors who were taking over Nebraska and the Dakotas from the Indians probably thought they had God on their side too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a good analogy.
And so it always seems like religions rationalize their bad behavior based a lot on what they read in the Bible or in Tanakh. It's sort of like this post hoc rationalization that's gone on. And earlier somebody asked whether Christians take the Bible literally, and though they're much more focused on Christ and original sin and forgiveness, there's a range of people who really do take it literally.
Of course.
And have God on their side, and that justifies everything. And I'm sure if you asked Trump, he would think God was on his side, as evidenced by the fact he owns a lot of land.
Yes. And by the way, people justified slavery based on the Bible. Hate to say that, but the very first set of laws after the 10 Commandments is how you treat your slave. Very unfortunate. So again, if we don't put all of this in some kind of context and just say this is God's word, then you can take it in all kinds of horrible ways. By the way, I skipped over something I want to go back to very briefly. And of course, we have an ad for Ralph's on the side, but this is, if I can read my own handwriting. Where's Simeon? Okay, I can't find, somewhere along the way. Oh, here it is. Yeah. So, oh yeah, Simeon is the first one. What am I talking about? So the second lot came out for the tribe of Simeon, according to its clans. Their inheritance laid within the territory of Judah. This was an inheritance of the tribe of the Simeonites, according to its clans. The inheritance of the Simeonites was taken from the share of Judah because Judah's portion was more than they needed. So the Simeonites received their inheritance within the territory of Judah. And apparently, according to, I think, the Jewish commentary, there was a curse that Jacob made against Simeon, his son, because remember when Shechem raped Dinah, and then Shechem was told that if he wanted to marry her, he had to be circumcised, and the whole clan got circumcised. And then Simeon and was it Levi and Simeon who went and killed them all? So this is punishment for the Simeonites, that they only get this little bit of land within the land of Judah. Okay, let's go to chapter 21. Now, we're going on dividing the land still, but we're going to come down here. 43 is what I need. Here we are at the very end here. This is the conclusion of this division of the land. So God gave Israel all the land he had sworn to give their ancestors, and they took possession of it and settled there. God gave them rest on every side, just as God had sworn to their ancestors. Not one of their enemies withstood them. God gave all their enemies into their hands. Not one of all of God's good promises to Israel failed. Every one was fulfilled. And according to my Christian commentary, God directs history for his disobedient people through his warning and judging word. So here they're obeying, and therefore they're rewarded. And when they disobey, they're going to be punished. And we're going to go to chapter 22, which is Joshua's final speech. This is right before he dies. Would someone like to read this? Sandy?
I can read it.
Okay, Jason, go ahead.
The start of 22?
Yeah.
Then Joshua summoned the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half tribe of Manasseh and said to them, "You have done all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded, and you have obeyed me in everything I commanded. For a long time now, to this very day, you have not deserted your fellow Israelites, but have carried out the mission the Lord your God gave you. Now that the Lord your God has given them rest as he promised, return to your homes in the land that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you on the other side of the Jordan. But be very careful to keep the commandment and the law that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you, to love the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to him, to keep his commands, to hold fast to him, and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul." Then Joshua blessed them and sent them away, and they went to their homes. To the half tribe of Manasseh, Moses had given land in Bashan, and to the other half of the tribe, Joshua gave land on the west side of the Jordan, along with their fellow Israelites. When Joshua sent them home, he blessed them, saying, "Return to your homes with your great wealth, with large herds of livestock, with silver, gold, bronze, and iron, and a great quantity of clothing, and divide the plunder from your enemies with your fellow Israelites." So the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half tribe of Manasseh left the Israelites at Shiloh and Canaan to return to Gilead, their own land, which they had acquired in accordance with the command of the Lord through Moses. When they came to Geliloth, near the Jordan in the land of Canaan, the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half tribe of Manasseh built an imposing altar there by the Jordan. And when the Israelites heard that they had built the altar on the border of Canaan at Geliloth near the Jordan on the Israelite side, the whole assembly of Israel gathered at Shiloh to go to war against them. So the Israelites sent
Pinhas, there he is.
Oh, that's Pinhas. Okay. As son of Eleazar, the priest, to the land of Gilead, to Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh. With him, they sent 10 of the chief men, one from each of the tribes of Israel, each the head of a family division among the Israelite clans. When they went to Gilead, to Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh, they said to them, "The whole assembly of the Lord says, how could you break faith with the God of Israel like this? How could you turn away from the Lord and build yourselves an altar in rebellion against him now? Was not the sin of Peor enough for us? Up to this very day,
Where they got skewered.
we have not cleansed ourselves from that sin, even though a plague fell on the community of the Lord. Are you now turning away from the Lord? If you rebel against the Lord today, tomorrow he will be angry with the whole community of Israel. If the land you possess is defiled, come over to the Lord's land, where the Lord's tabernacle stands, and share the land with us. But do not rebel against the Lord or against us by building an altar for yourselves, other than the altar of the Lord our God." When Achan, son of Zerah, was unfaithful in regard to the devoted things, did not wrath come on the whole community of Israel? He was not the only one who died for his sin. Then Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh replied to the heads of the clans of Israel, The mighty one, God the Lord, the mighty one, God the Lord, he knows, and let Israel know. If this has been in rebellion or disobedience to the Lord, do not spare us this day. If we have built our own altar to turn away from the Lord and to offer burnt offerings and grain offerings, or to sacrifice fellowship offerings on it, may the Lord himself call us to account. No, we did it for fear that someday your descendants might say to us, what do you have to do with the Lord, the God of Israel? The Lord has made the Jordan a boundary between us and you Reubenites and Gadites. You have no share in the Lord. So your descendants might cause ours to stop fearing the Lord. That is why we said, let us get ready and build an altar, but not for burnt offerings or sacrifices. On the contrary, it is to be a witness between us and you and the generations that follow, that we will worship the Lord at his sanctuary with our burnt offerings, sacrifices, and fellowship offerings. And then in the future, your descendants will not be able to say to ours, you have no share in the Lord. And we said, if they ever say this to us or to our descendants, we will answer, look at the replica of the Lord's altar, which our ancestors built, not for burnt offerings and sacrifices, but as a witness between us and you. Far be it from us to rebel against the Lord and turn away from him today by building an altar for burnt offerings, grain offerings, and sacrifices, other than the altar of the Lord our God that stands before his tabernacle.
Okay, you could stop. All right. I mean, even though we have a few more verses to go, but okay. So the point here is that at the very beginning of the conquest, you had somebody who was being unfaithful, Achan, and now at the very end of the conquest, you have these tribes building an altar that is not the proper altar to be built, even though they come up with an excuse for why they did it. So this is a framing, because we're now basically at the end. There's going to be a couple more chapters that are important chapters that we'll look at next time. And it's the covenant that everybody agrees to and the tribes basically coming together. But the framing of the conquest is a sin at the beginning and a sin at the end. Even though during the course of the book of Joshua, they're doing what they're supposed to do. They conquer the land and all of that, but there's also sin. So this tells us that there are going to be struggles in this new land. It's not simply dealing with the enemy that possesses the land, the Canaanites. And by the way, the Philistines are going to occupy the western part of the land, and they're going to be there for a long time. They never get thrown out until David. So you're going to have the enemies. You're going to have the desire for more land by certain people, by certain tribes. You're going to have jealousy between the tribes. You're going to have the possibility of falling away from God, as happens in both of these cases. The tribes are going to possibly have wars between themselves, not just against the enemy. Like in this case, one group is blaming the other of apostasy. And so they go and wage a war against them right after they've completed dividing the land that they've just conquered from the big enemy. So we're going to see how they're going to resolve this next time. But these are all warnings about what is to come. And that's why we have all those other books, Jason, because there are too many times that they, do what they're not supposed to do and have to get punished. So we're going to meet again in a couple of weeks. I think March 6th, whenever that first weekend in March is. I think we'll finish the book at that point. And then our next much more interesting book will be the Book of Judges. The Book of Judges is a very, very interesting book with lots of wonderful stories. Also some horrible stories, which luckily the worst stories at the end of the Book of Judges, and we won't get there for a while, but there's some very unfortunate stories. Okay, so great to see all of you this morning. Thank you for your great comments. And we will see you. By the way, hopefully people will come tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock for our session with Cantor Stephen Pizzarni.